Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, you didn't think we were going to ignore the growth spurt from Chris Livingston, our number one son on the podcast. What does this mean for the Bucks this season, and specifically Chris Livingston? Also, some news to catch up on around the league, as we've already seen one team knock out their media day. Some tidbits that came from that, some injury news, some signing news, and other things. We'll get to all of that coming up next here on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We kind of teased it yesterday, Camille, as the story came out Tuesday afternoon from Jim Owczarski of the Journal Sentinel. It started, at least to my knowledge, in a Reddit AMA that Jim did where Chris Livingston came up. So it must have been one of the everydayers mentioning Chris. And Jim revealed, yes, he has grown. And it's one of the jokes that I had with him all throughout last season. Now, this isn't the Giannis growth spurt where it's, holy cow, Chris Livingston is 6'11" now. But I mean, maybe we've just reached the point where we need the season to be here because we're grasping at straws. But when I saw that, Camille, I don't know if I've seen better news in months.
When that article came out, people's first thought was, oh, Justin is going to be excited about this news. I love that Frank had the tweet, a timely tweet with the Vince McMahon gift, given that docuseries came out, although you don't want to be compared to him. Neither here nor there. What is here and there is the fact that Chris Livingston has apparently grown 1.5 inches. So he was drafted at 6'6", and he's now 6'7.5". I'm not sure if that's with shoes or without. If we should really just say he's like 6'8"-ish, somewhere in that range. But again, hearing that he had the growth spurt and then seeing what they did with him in Summer League, which again, they were just trying to see what he could do at different positions, so on and so forth, playing some small ball 4 at the 5 at times. Like, we talked about the fact that Chris Livingston's physique, the fact that he was a bigger wing, was always one of the more appealing things about his ability to play defense. And to hear that he's grown 1.5 inches as well, like, that just adds to the excitement, I would think, because he's becoming an even bigger wing now because he has a couple extra inches on.
So, 6'8", I think we said. We'll go with that for his height. His wingspan was 6'11" prior to this. So I would imagine the wingspan has grown as well to that of a 7-footer. I mean, it is not ridiculous to say, man, he's got the wing size of Bobby Portis, because Bobby's is about like a 7'1", which you're getting in a smaller height and a more nimble defensive frame. I'm not trying to say, hey, Chris Livingston's going to be a rim protector now, but it's just, man, I got to tell you, I've been so invested on Chris Livingston for the last year that any piece of good news like this to come out, part of it is shtick. But as we've talked through this throughout the summer and really late last season too, Camille, I do truly believe if there's a dark horse to make some type of impact, not like he's going to start and he's going to play in 70 games, but to be the guy, as we just went through, who's going to be the person that surprises you? Who's going to be the minutes vulture? I think Chris Livingston, the more we start to hear, he's the guy. And it dates all the way back to the end of the season when John Horst talked and mentioned, as you pointed out on the show the other day, the veteran names that were the core members of this team that I think a lot of fans kind of eye rolled at because it included Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis. But he specifically singled out Chris Livingston and said, Chris Livingston's been working his butt off. He is going to be a contributor for us this upcoming season. So you filed that away. You watched him during the summer league. And again, the numbers didn't wow you or jump off the page. And it wasn't, wow, he's a bona fide scorer. It was the little things. It was the dirty work that we've preached how important that is for the young players to do. And then you hear this. It's just been a succession of one thing after another, exactly what you want to hear for a player in his spot.
And in addition to that, in the article, it was just mentioning like what Chris has been working on this summer. And it was things that we noted that we kind of saw in summer league as well. But just to hear him come and just clearly say, like, I had to work on playing without the ball, work on catching, shooting, work on cutting, and understanding as well, like, but what's going to really get me on the court and get me some real playing time is defense. And I know I need to lean into being a defensive guy. And I just loved how the article was also talking about the not oxymoron that comes with it, but being a young guy in the league and being like, I know I have to be patient and wait for my opportunity to come, but also being hungry in the process and continuing to get better and being ready when my number is called and just trying to balance that. Because he mentioned, like, I knew I wasn't going to really play much last season, my rookie year. And then with everything that happened, in the preseason with the Dame trade and everything like that, like, just felt like it wasn't going to happen. A coaching switch in the middle of the season. But this summer, it feels like the plan was in place. It sounds like from what we've heard from John Horst, from seeing Summer League, that Chris Livingston, has taken advantage of his summer work and has really been putting that time in. Because for John Horst to single him out and saying, like, yeah, we have the, 3 19, 20-year-olds on our roster with Chris, with AJ Johnson, with Tyler Smith. But Chris, what we've seen from him this summer, like, we think he's going to be able to contribute to the team this year. Like, that means something. And I think it's, like you said, it's not starting Chris Livingston. It's going from probably playing 4 minutes a game in his rookie year to maybe 10-ish. That feels like at this point, with the hype, quote unquote, around what's going on with Chris Livingston, like, that feels like it might be easy money once we do our Bucks over under minutes per game for Chris Livingston. Like, that 10 mark feels like a good place to start.
He, when you couple this with everything else we've talked about with the defense, all you need to see is growth, right? As we said, most of last season, I didn't know where to expect the Bucks to finish defensively. I think we both kind of felt like 12, 13, somewhere around there. Like, if you can do that with what we thought we were getting with the duo of Giannis and Dame, like, that should be good enough. Where your offense, we expect it to be. If your defense is right around the top 10, it should be good enough. It was nowhere near that, obviously. It is going to be better this year. I do feel confident in saying that. If not, something drastically went wrong, and with a number of things, this team is not going to look anywhere near the same next year. But part of what I think is going to make it better is, in many ways, it is kind of funny that what we heard Adrian Griffin, when he arrived, the system that he wanted to run, anybody could have told you. We all said it. Kane and Frank and everybody mentioned it. Like, you don't have the personnel to play. Mm-hmm. Still not totally there, but they have a lot more of the personnel to play this way now. When you think about a more seasoned Andre Jackson Jr., and he was the prototype, perfect for what Adrian Griffin wanted to do in terms of ball pressure and everything else. But DeLon Wright, we just saw David Aldridge on the Here District with Marcus and Chris Johnson a week or two ago, raving about DeLon Wright as somebody in the DC area that watched a lot of Wizards games and saw DeLon Wright there, and pointed out, look, the one thing that I don't think you realize if you're just casually observing the league and only see DeLon Wright a couple of times a year is the passing lanes and what he does there, deflections and loose ball creates. Exactly what Adrian Griffin wanted. You think about the wingspan that they've assembled. Look, we joke about it, but Chris Livingston is probably a 7-foot wingspan now, but beyond 7 feet. He was already 6'11" with this growth spurt. Taurean Prince, not to beat a dead horse, better off at this point in his career, even if it's not as good as it needs to be, as Lakers fans would point out, better off having him than Jay Crowder. Taurean Prince is a 6'6" guy with a 7-foot wingspan. So you're starting to assemble all these pieces that have more length, more versatility, and in certainly the case of DeLon Wright, more ability to play the passing lanes that, again, I'm not going to make as bold of a prediction as I did with Chris Livingston and say they're going to be a top 8 defense. I would be floored if this defense is not much better. And even with some of the questions that we've addressed of, Dame in the backcourt, he has help now with some of those additions. With Chris Middleton, and can he hold up on the perimeter? I think they're going to be pushing close to the top 10.
Yeah, and I think that's fair because when you think about the offseason that the Bucks had, again, limited resources, you mentioned the vets that the Bucks have been able to bring in that fit. It was like identifying here are some areas where the 2023-24 team was weak and we need to improve defensively. So you're bringing in these guys that can help fit around the pieces that you already have and make those lineups a bit more versatile. But more than anything, and I've mentioned this before, one of the things I think that the Bucks are going to be banking on, not even just this season, but the next as well, is some internal improvement as well from the young guys, from guys on the roster, just period, because you're going to need that as well, which is why I was like, I do wonder how this new CBA is going to continue affecting how teams are approaching building their teams, given the fact that there are more restrictions and when you're trying to bring in new guys, but having more of an emphasis on player development internally as well, because you're going to need that. And the Bucks draft record hasn't been that great over the last few years. So if some of these young guys on the roster that they currently have can hit, it is going to be a really, really big boom for this team. Again, given the financial constraints that they have, given what this team is lacking and what they need, athleticism. Doc Rivers talked about that at the end of the season. So the hope is that at least one or two of these young guys can pop and become a role player for this team. And the role doesn't have to be that big. It's just when you're in the game, can you come in and do the job that you've been assigned to do? Can you play the defense, which was an area of weakness for this team last year, especially at the point of attack? Can you come in and do your job? And I think that this Bucks team, like, again, it's summertime. Media day is on Monday. There's a lot of optimism in the air, but you can see the pathway for the defense being vastly, well, I shouldn't say vastly. You can see the pathway for the defense being better this year than it was last year.
I think vastly is fair because for all intents and purposes, this was a bottom 10 defense last year.
It's fair, yeah.
So even if you're just inside of the top half, to me, that is vastly improved because you're not in the lower third of the league. You remember those? It's a family show, but you remember erotic novels back in the day, like that Fabio was on the cover of?
Yes.
When we returned from break, I have my own version of that novel.
What a tease.
We are going to read through. Coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about our friends over at Prize Picks. Look, Prize Picks, the number one way to get in on the action this season. It's the best way to get in on action in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. You can play alongside celebrities like Drewski, Joe Budden, MMA champ Sugar Sean O'Malley. You can now find that in the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. So what is Prize Picks, you're asking? It's America's number one daily fantasy sports app with more than 5 million active members. And I said it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because all you do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And from there, watch the winnings roll in. All you have to do, download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 off instantly when you play $5. That's the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. And you've heard Camille and I mention GameTime, just how easy it is to use when you're on the go looking for tickets to any of those events you're attending, not just sports, concert, comedy, theater, the sweet science of professional wrestling. GameTime, the number one app to use to secure those tickets. Here's what makes GameTime better than the rest. You can see a panoramic view from your seats within the app before you get to your purchase screen. And speaking of that purchase screen, toggle in the all-in pricing feature. That will show you the total upfront cost. No sticker shock and surprise fees at checkout. GameTime will even credit you 110% of the difference if you can find those seats cheaper elsewhere. And best of all, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, to get $20 off your first purchase. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Game time. So the novel that I had to read, Camille, when I take into account everything I saw that I liked, albeit in brief stints, the Jazz game, very forgettable, but some of the memories I had were watching Chris Livingston in that game, what we saw in Summer League, what we heard John Horst say. And then I go back to some draft profiles. Mm-hmm. Here's some of the write-ups on Chris Livingston. Great physicality and NBA body. Rebounded the ball very well at the close of his college season, averaging just under 8 rebounds per game over the final 8 games he played, playing next to the NCAA's leading rebounder that season. Good explosiveness, solid leaper who finishes well on the break, 37-inch vertical max at the draft combine. But here's where it starts to really get steamy. Excels at crashing the boards from the perimeter. Makes good cuts on offense that can allow him to get easy looks if he's playing next to a quality playmaker. I think Damian Lillard is a quality playmaker in my mind. Has a compact, consistent shot release that, if honed, could develop into a threat, especially from the corners. Can finish strong on straight line drives to the rim. Runs the court in transition, looking to get easy baskets, can use his size and strength to bully smaller defenders around the paint. A lot of strengths. We're not going to bore you with the weaknesses. You read all those things, and you talk about the growth spurt and everything else, and especially those running the break. Can he excel from the corners? Just as we talked about with Andre Jackson Jr. Okay, you got to really hone the offense. It doesn't seem like as much of a chore with Chris Livingston, especially given the ask that you're going to have from him. But when you get down to the, cutting, as we talked about a lot last year, Pat Connaughton was it, basically, the guy that was moving off the ball. If you bring that's a massive addition to the offense in the minutes that you're on the floor, but also running the floor and getting to the rim. As we joked, Giannis last year at times, he'd see MarJon and Andre Jackson Jr. running the floor in front of him, and it probably stunned him, where he thought, I'm the only one that does this. So the more that you add, when we talk about get more explosive, play younger and faster, you're not going to wave a wand overnight and be more athletic, but that's a way to cheat the system, if you will. These young guys that are going to energize the fast break. So long story short, I never sold my stock. I've continued to buy more. I've continued to ask people if theirs is for sale. And the problem that I'm running into now is more and more people have seemingly become Chris Livingston truthers. So you're all welcome. You're all friends of the pod, and you love to see it.
Can you blame them? Can you blame them at this point with everything that we've been hearing about Chris Livingston, why the stock is starting to increase? And there's always, it feels like, a young guy on every Bucks roster that fans gravitate towards, and they're like, this is the guy. He needs to play more minutes. We got to see what he can do. And it seems like the Chris Livingston stock is rising for sure. And I think that this article that we referenced in the first segment adds to that. Summer League adds to that. So I think that this is going to be one of those seasons where Chris Livingston is going to be that name that you're hearing from fans saying, like, we want to see what he can do. If not for any other reason, based on what we've heard over the summer. And I just have to say as well, I love the fact that your version of those old, what's getting steamy for you is good basketball. It's good basketball traits. No one can ever question the love of the game from you, Justin. I tell you that.
Media day is Monday, and I've been asked by a few. So you're going to put in a request. You're going to interview Chris Livingston at media day. And I'm still torn because, as they always say, don't meet your heroes, right? So we'll see, but I will be at media day on Monday, and we got some news on that coming up in the final segment of the show. There's some news around the league too. Some of it good for the Bucks. Some of it just interesting in general. We teased some of it on yesterday's show. There's been some more developments though. So we'll clean up some of that. And as I mentioned, take a look ahead to media day coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Best of all, you get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. $5, all you need to get $200 in bonus bets. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. And we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, we invite you to check out the Locked On NBA podcast. There is no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so some news items to get caught up on. I guess first and foremost, what we missed, over the weekend already? We're pushing a week old that this news is. Joel Embiid signs the massive extension with the 76ers. I guess the only real question I have about this is, does that do anything to the level of pressure that's on Philadelphia this season?
I feel like the level of pressure that's on Philly right now is already crazy high, just given the fact that during this whole time we've talked about it, haven't gotten past the second round of the playoffs, like haven't been to the conference finals throughout this entire process of Joel Embiid being there. And then this actually, maybe it's even ramped up even more because now this offseason, you go out, you upgrade your third option from Tobias Harris to Paul George. There's a lot more expectations that come with it because in addition to the internal fan pressure that's happening in Philly and amongst their fan base, amongst the organization, now you have an additional spotlight on you from a national sense of like you added one of the better players in the league to your team, someone who has a great history of what he has done in the game of basketball. So the expectations have always been for Philly to be a top team in the East, but now it's like, what more excuses can you have to not get there? You have Tyrese Maxey, who has developed into a really solid number 2 option. You have Paul George. You've extended Joel Embiid. Like, now that I'm talking through it, yes, I think that it actually did raise the stakes in Philly a bit more because if not now, then when are they going to finally break through?
Yeah, I know when we were first starting to have this tiers type of conversation, we were talking about the Bucks and the Sixers. I think it was a live show that we were doing, and there was a lot of Bucks fans saying Philly's got more pressure on them than the Bucks. And initially, I disagreed. I think I'm wrong. Clearly, as more time has passed by and you've really started to think about it, my thought was, well, I mean, this is the first year they have time, but that's just not the way it works in sports and the NBA, especially. You don't have time. It's instant gratification. You have to win now. My thought was the age and the contract situation for the Bucks. Like, no, I put them in front of there. But as we've seen, no, it's Philly.
It's up there.
Go show us something. The point that you made too of, hey, it's great. Get out of the second round of the playoffs. I mean, I was just joking about it with a Knicks fan friend that I have who was really thumping his chest before the next piece of news we'll get to and saying, look, it's cute that you guys have assembled this Villanova roster and you've exceeded your expectations, but maybe try to get to a conference finals. Maybe try to beat the pesky Pacers or not fall victim to the Atlanta Hawks or the 8th-seeded, same team that beat the Bucks, but 8th-seeded Miami Heat one of these years. So yes, and it is fascinating. And what does it mean with the microscope that's going to be on this team more than ever before? There's the obvious easy joke to make too of, Joel Embiid's going to make $64 million a season. Like, is he going to play 64 games? Like, he's going to be making more than $1 million per game. I mentioned the piece of Knicks news. You and I were very skeptical is not a fair word, but we were ready to push, slightly nudge back on let's cool it on the Knicks.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen similar stories with Tibbs where the candle, it's maybe not an 8-hour burn. It might be a 2-hour burn that you're getting here. We both questioned the loss of Isaiah Hartenstein, and I think there were some Knicks fans who were like, who cares? When you talk about the pecking order of this team, I still have massive questions there, but now you add to it Mitchell Robinson is essentially on the Kristaps Porzingis timeline and will not be available until likely January, maybe December for this team. A team that is likely going to be starting. I heard Ian Begley say he thinks it's going to be Jericho Sims that starts at center, and you're still going to go with Precious Achiuwa off the bench. But the point is, that's the list. Those are the bigs. Julius Randle, unless you want to experiment with that at the 5. I have massive questions about the rebounding for the Knicks. I know their guards can rebound. There's no rim protection. And Mitchell Robinson, in fairness, took a step backward by his choice as a rebounder last year. I know he talked about it last year. A lot of times he was chasing blocks and he was out of position for rebounding and defensive assignments. So he didn't want to be a shot blocker anymore. Mm-hmm. But now you have none if you're the Knicks. And I don't know about red flag, but the antennas went up where I thought, okay, as we said, one of these teams, at least one, is going to be a disappointment. Are we seeing the groundwork here?
I mean, when I saw that news as well, my first thought was like, man, that front court is going to be so thin in New York because Julius Randle, from last I saw, they're not exactly sure if he's going to be ready when the season starts. Yeah. Now, nothing I've seen has projected him to be out as long as Mitchell Robinson. Yeah. But the fact that when the season gets rolling, you're down Mitchell Robinson, who we know is probably until December, January, and then Julius Randle for however much longer it's going to be for him to come back from that injury that he suffered last season. You don't have Hartenstein, and now you're leaning on Sims and Precious to be that defensive anchor for the defense. And one thing we know about Tom Thibodeau defenses is that he likes to have a rim protector out there. Like that's part of the way he runs his system. And that's compromised a bit, in my opinion, now with Jericho Sims being the guy out there running the defense in that way. So for the Knicks, it's going to have to be them trying to figure out ways to win games. I don't want to say tread water because there is talent on that roster. It's just that the front court in particular is a bit thin for them. And when you're going up in matchups against bigger centers, bigger teams like Philly, the Bucks can fall into that bucket as well with Brook and with Giannis there. It's going to be a bit more difficult to get those wins. So good luck for the Knicks. That's going to be kind of tough to overcome a bit in the early portions of the season. But if they get off to a surprising start and they can weather that, then, I'll feel a lot better about their prospects. But that's going to be a challenge to start the season.
I've seen people to suggest, look, they're clearly going to make a trade for a big at some point. And the reality is likely, yes, they will probably be doing that. I haven't spent too much time digging into who could it potentially be, but I just don't know what you're getting that is a big enough upgrade, because let's say I would guess Precious Achiuwa is likely moved, especially since he waived the no trade in his contract this offseason. They also have the ability to package their taxpayer mid-level and use that for any incoming salary. So realistically, they could probably bring in a contract that's anywhere from $12-ish million to basically like 21 if you package Mitchell Robinson and Precious Achiuwa. But like the likely targets there would be like a Rashawn Holmes of the Wizards. Maybe, just maybe, the Atlanta Hawks are willing to do something with Clint Capella. That would actually be the biggest name I would circle and keep an eye on here. We talked about Wendell Carter with the Magic. I still just don't see the Magic's impetus to make that deal unless there's, draft picks, heavy draft pick compensation going back to them as well. So the long and short of it is like, yes, they're going to make a trade. At this moment, I just don't know what it is. I think the most intriguing name is probably Clint Capella to keep an eye on there for the New York Knicks here. Yeah. The other interesting pieces here. So speaking of injuries really quickly, we were talking about this the other night that I saw, I think it was on the NBA subreddit, that somebody had translated some interview that Kawhi's agent or some of his representation gave either in China or to some Chinese news outlet. And whenever you see these things all the time, it's basically like these types of stories. And did you see these videos of Ben Simmons knocking down open jumpers in a gym? But whenever you see it, you're like, okay, I mean, I guarantee this wasn't actually said and it was taken out of context, or this isn't legit at all. But the gist of it was, yeah, we're not so sure if Kawhi Leonard's going to be available for the start of the season, and like we may be worried about this. I think the closing line was, "You'll hear more from the Clippers at media day," and then we learned just the other day, not looking great for the knee. We did our over under surpass draft. I don't remember which of us ended up with the Clippers.
I think I had both LA teams.
Okay. I didn't know what to make of the Clippers, but when you see this news, it just makes it even more dumbfounding. That, I mean, I take this at face value that I don't think any of us assumed Kawhi Leonard was going to play close to a full season, probably ever again. But now it makes you question even more, like, is this going to be like a half of a season, a quarter of a season, what? And it just makes it even more dumbfounding of, why would you not sign Paul George? Like, I get wanting to restart, but you don't own your draft picks. So if you're bottoming out, you're getting no benefit from it. It just makes no sense to go all in and then 2 years later say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to take a step backward. I'm not coming all out, but I'm still not going to stay all in.
Yeah, the Kawhi piece is interesting. I mean, it shouldn't be that big of a surprise, I don't think, when we think about what happened over the summer with the Olympic team, where it was kind of like, something's not right with the knee. He's trying to play through it, but we're just not going to do that.
It wasn't Kawhi that decided I'm leaving the team. He was sent home.
And it's like, just doesn't look right. Like this, it's not the time yet. And then to hear that he had another procedure this offseason on that knee, and how the Clippers are saying like he's limited to just strengthening his knee at the beginning of camp, but they're optimistic. Of course, there's going to be optimism. You want to have that around it, but like that's difficult because without Paul George being there in LA alongside of him, that puts James Harden again as like the main piece to try to carry the load for this team. There's no other star there, so to speak, for him to also split that weight with. So Kawhi's injury is one of those ones where it's unfortunate, just the way that the injuries have impacted his play over the last few years, because when Kawhi is healthy and good to go, we have seen just the amazing basketball that man can play, both sides, offensively, defensively. So it's unfortunate to hear it. It's not necessarily surprising to me, as I mentioned with what happened this summer, but you don't like to hear that. That's the one thing about, as we approach media day, you start hearing about the injuries or the offseason procedure. So hopefully for the Bucks, the only surprise news that we got dropped in Summer League when we heard that Chris Middleton had the 2 ankle surgeries, and there's no other surprise injury news for the Bucks.
And bringing that up, I mean, that's going to be tomorrow's show for us. As we mentioned, media day is Monday. So tomorrow we're going to take a look at what are the things we want to get answered and questions that we have going into media day. You always learn some things, as you mentioned there. What are the big things that we have circled? Same for you as well. So leave your comments and send them to Camille and I on Twitter as well. That will be tomorrow's show. And I think, especially with the injury angle or surgery, it's Chris Middleton specific for the Bucks and Bucks fans. I imagine that's going to be a lot of the discourse that we get. Speaking of media day, the Celtics had theirs yesterday. I believe the Denver Nuggets or 2 days ago, the Denver Nuggets are having theirs today, or they had theirs yesterday. Not a whole lot that came out from there, as we were kind of curious. Okay, what are we going to learn from these two teams? Basically, Jaylen Brown shaved, and Kristaps Porzingis may be back a little sooner than the initial timeline. That was really it in terms of noteworthy items to come from their media day.
Yeah, outside of Jason Tatum discussing his Olympics run and saying, I didn't need any more motivation. Like, getting one championship was never the goal. We're focused on trying to win more.
It was the All-Game MVP that was the goal, so we could get that sweet tat.
Exactly. So, yeah, media day is interesting, which is why tomorrow's show I'm looking forward to, because a lot of times with media day, it's a lot of generalizations, a lot of fluff, a lot of optimism, a lot of I've never been in better shape my whole career. So it's like, what can you really take from what you hear? Is there going to be anything interesting to garner from it? So I'm always excited for media day because it means the season is coming. Like we're getting close to it. Your first look at guys. So yeah, not too much from the Celtics media day, but I'm sure given the fact that the other 28 teams are all having their media day on Monday, like it's going to be a lot of NBA news on the timelines.
Yeah, and just get out of the way now too. Monday morning, it is the earliest start to a media day I ever remember in over 10 years of being around and covering this team. 8:30 in the morning, that media day is going to get started for the Bucks. So we expect it to wrap up before noon. So the plan for Monday's show is Camille and I are going to do something early in the afternoon to basically get into instant reactions to media day. If you're at work and missed the live streams of it, or you're following along from quotes from Jim or Eric or me and anything that we're putting out there during the event, the show is going to be for you, that we're going to just do live reactions and recap everything that we heard take place at media day. So that'll be Monday's show. We may do it live, but it'll be sometime around noon that we get into that show on Monday. Tomorrow's show, kind of previewing media day and the questions that you and I have going into it. As I mentioned, if you have questions that are pressing, leave them in the comments or send them to Camille and I on Twitter, and we'll filter those through our list as well. Not to give too much away, but I think one of the bigger questions that I have going into media day, Camille, is did Doc Rivers keep the goatee? Because if he did, it could be a revenge season that we get that version of Doc Rivers this upcoming season.
The goatee is going to power the revenge
Glenn.
tour. Give him like the super villain revenge tour powers this year for Doc Rivers. Listen, we not talked about it. The Bucks got a big chip on their shoulder. They're coming in with a little bit of an edge of, people don't believe in us, so on and so forth. So if Doc does have the goatee, I think he's leaning in as well.
So a lot of media day related items coming up the next couple of days here on Locked On Bucks, and maybe, just maybe we could get the patron saint of the podcast to make an appearance here in Chris Livingston. Leave your thoughts on the Chris Livingston experience, what you're looking forward to, what you're expecting from him this upcoming season as well. That'll do it for today's show. As I mentioned, a lot of media day starting to get into the weeds here in the next couple of shows. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.